Our scripture reference for this morning is found in Ephesians chapter 4. A little bit different sermon series than perhaps what I normally do. I call this a topical biblical series in that we're dealing with topics that we all deal with in life, but we're dealing with them from a biblical perspective. And so while I might not be going verse by verse, perhaps like I might normally do, it's all based in Scripture. And as I kind of got the idea for this, I would find passages of Scripture that kind of jumped out at me dealing with each segment, each week of the series. This week comes to us from Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. And I often wonder about these letters, because, these letters were written to the church as matters of instruction to that church, perhaps even in response to questions that were asked of Paul by the church, but then they became circulars. They didn't have printing presses in. They didn't have email, obviously, or texting, or Facebook, or any of those things. And so they would have to find some kind of way to circulate these. And so basically, one copy would be made, and then perhaps when it got to the church, if they had someone who could read and write, they'd make another copy, and then they would circulate these letters throughout the community of believers, which might encompass 3 or 4 or 5 different countries throughout what we would refer to now as the ancient Near East. And I just often wonder, when these letters arrived back at the churches that kind of instigated the communication to begin with, if Paul's words were what they expected, or if it blew them out of the water, or if it made them mad, half the time I think that if what I read in the Scripture isn't upsetting me just a little bit, then I need to find a new passage of Scripture. And it's good to be comforted, and it's good to have words of assurance, but every now and then I just need to be upset. Well, are you that way? I just need to have something just kind of pow, knock me just right upside my head. I wonder, though, if some of the times Paul's words were like that to these churches. And this week is no exception. From Ephesians 4, beginning in the 17th verse. With the Lord's authority, I say this: no longer live as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives, because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. That doesn't sound like open-minded, change-oriented people to me, does it to you? Not at all. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure, eagerly practice every kind of impurity. But that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Paul's talking about some big changes there, isn't he? He starts off by saying, no longer live as the Gentiles do. You know who the Gentiles were? They're everyone who was far away from. They were not God's people. They were the one, whenever the Scriptures refer to the Gentiles, those are the ones that are referred to as being far away from God. Now, Paul was sent to minister and be a missionary to the Gentiles and bring those folks into the family of God. But he's saying they're hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander away from the truth. They're hard-hearted, stiff-necked, stubborn. They don't like change. They're not going to change. They have no intention of changing. You know anybody like that? Ever been that way yourself? Come on. Oh, don't lie to me. We've all been that way, haven't we? And why is that? It's because change is hard, isn't it? We don't like change. Study after study shows that even in places that you would associate with the most change, people really don't like change. We don't. We might say we do. But when it comes down to it, at the very, very root of who we are, we do not like change. Study after study shows that we are creatures of habit, and as such, we resist change. Now, sometimes we just got to force ourselves into change, much like the character Reuben in the movie Along Came Polly, starring Ben Stiller and Jennifer Aniston. Have you seen that movie? Very, very silly movie. It was incredibly silly, but there's a scene in it that I think talks about change and how deeply rooted our resistance to change is. So let's take a look. As I said, a very silly movie, very predictable. I mean, we could all write those things, right? But the truth of the matter is, we all need to change something in our lives. There's something in our lives that needs to change. And we might not resort to eating peanuts off the street in New York, and when it grosses out the street vendor, you know it's bad, right? But whatever it is, whether it's a financial habit, whether it's a bad habit, whether it's our attitude about our health, whether it's what we're eating in our diets, hey, let's take it up a notch and say whether it's in our spiritual life, whether it's victory over a particular sin or attitude, maybe it's a deeper understanding of the scriptures, maybe it's involvement in missions, maybe it's joining a Bible study, maybe it's stepping up your giving in the church. Whatever, there is something, friends, in each of our lives that is begging for change. Everybody wants to change something. And if you don't want to change anything about yourself, then you are setting your sights way too low. Your standards need to be ratcheted up just a little bit. Because you see, here's the deal. Change equals growth. And if you aren't changing, you aren't growing. You aren't growing as a person, as a parent, as a professional, or here's one for you, as a believer. You're not growing as a disciple if you're not changing. But as we said, change isn't easy. Lasting change, important change, isn't easy. It's easy to make New Year's resolutions on January 1st, but it's hard to keep them, especially when it comes to changing the way we eat when Mardi Gras rolls around, right? And there's king cake in the break room, you know, and Popeye's fried chicken at every parade. I mean, any Popeye's fans? I'm allowed to eat Popeyes during Mardi Gras, and that's it. God has given me special dispensation for Popeyes during Mardi Gras. Okay? They're hard to keep. It's hard to make lasting change. Kind of like the guy who was stopping smoking. He said, it's not hard to quit smoking. He said, I've quit 1,000 times. It's hard to stay quit, isn't it? It's hard to keep the change, isn't it? Well, that's the title of our message today. Yeah? Keep the change. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about biblical principles that are going to help us make some lasting, meaningful changes in our lives. Getting rid of old habits, changing attitudes, beginning new mindsets and behaviors that will help us change and keep the change. Now, today we're going to be talking about thinking for a change. Change, believe it or not, begins in your mind. What you think about involves your ability to change. Your thoughts control your life. If you want to change, you have to think about that change. George Bernard Shaw says, those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. James Allen said, you are today wherever your thoughts have brought you. You will be tomorrow wherever your thoughts take you. Did you hear that? Let me say that one again. You are today where your thoughts have brought you. You will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you. That's how powerful your thoughts are. The Apostle Paul once said, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes. Put on a new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. That happens in the way you allow God to change your thought process.